Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. This is our, what is it, number, oh no, hold on. I had my number in my mind and all of a sudden I'm blank. This is our a 12th session of class. Oh, it's even up here, week 12. We continue on the discussion of the quizzes first. I'll go over the quiz a little bit. The quiz is rather, there was some tricks to it. You should have paid attention to them because some words usage. The first question, there is an inevitable movement or political change from unitary and authoritarian rule to more democratic rule, and that process is irreversible. Now, in some of the readings, this is usually called the modern, this is something that a lot of modern political thought, particularly Tocqueville and other people, make an argument about. Okay, this is the classic, what we call the modernist development theory. It's very Hegelian. It starts with Hegel and Hegel's understanding of the doctrine, both in his philosophy of mind, of the master-slave dialectic, the process where this tension between master and ruler and master and slave, right? That everyone, where none are free, one are free, then some become free, then more become free, then the majority become free, and then everyone becomes free. Okay, everyone becomes the ruler and free. He typifies this in three things: the Greek world, the Roman world, which the Roman world also collapses into the Middle Ages, and the German world. Okay. Which is modern world, he says. The German world is the modern world, of equality, okay? That's what the end of history is about. The end of history is this dialectical mobility towards more and more freedom, okay? And the end of history is this ultimate point where all freedom and all in other words, all are free and all are a thing. The problem with this is that this is not true. That is not inevitable. One problem is the problem of inequality. In other words, not every political okay. The world is divided both racially, ethnically, and culturally. Because cultures emerge out of both races and ethnicity. Okay. Okay. Now, not every culture or civilization are at the same level of development at the same time. If you look at the Arab world, much of the Arab and Islamic world today, you'll see that they're at a time when you look at their society, look at their structures, look at their way they organize, they have not really gotten past the 16th century, 15th, 16th century. In other words, structurally, their societal organizations, their political institutions, everything is still there, very much still at the same time, the same kind of structure that you would have seen in Europe in the 15th and 16th century, between 14th and 15th century. If you went to Italy in the 15th century, you would experience what you experience in much of the Arab world today. Okay? So therefore, you have to understand that not all political development is always at the same track. There is political development. There might be this trend, but it's not uniform and it's not horizontal, and it's not irreversible. So therefore, that's why this is the inevitability of this, and the irreversibility is therefore the problem of the claim. Okay? This is why the Fukuyama hypothesis was so laughable, right? Fukuyama's, there's a famous debate that people always talk about the early 1990s, early 2000s, the debate between Francis Fukuyama and his end of history hypothesis, right? About liberal democracy. And he's still writing on it. He modified it a little bit. He kind of backed away from it, but still wants to argue for it. And his current book is almost a kind of celebration of it, liberal democracy and its discontent. His recent, just brand new book is just another kind of like, oh my God, we're backsliding away from democracy. Okay, kind of. This has been if anyone who studies, I wrote about this just recently in my Facebook. I use my Facebook more as blogs with my friends. I put my one of my things I did was I complained after reading 30 books or something. I've had to read like 30 or 40 things, books over the past 2 years, like these brand new published books about political science or about American politics that I've read because during the COVID thing. Thank God some of them I didn't. Some of them I only had to read electronically in the sense that I found an e-book and I read it. Otherwise, I would go broke and going mad because the books were all uniformly horrible. It kind of made me like it's the stupidity of experts. These are leading experts, leading specialists, and all crying like hysterical schoolgirls about, oh, democracy is endangered. Oh my God, Trump, populism. Oh my God, out of control hystericism of this, and they're all kind of like offering that, and it's kind of with a tone at the same time, a hysterical tone, but also a tone of self-satisfaction of saying, I'm smarter than the rest of you. You should listen to me. Shut up, or shut up, idiots. Do what I tell you to do, kind of tone. Okay, it's like this. This is, and so therefore I read these books, and it's like I'm sitting here, and sometimes I wrote things about a review of them for my friend, the colleagues I work with. Because they always say that I'm into self-abuse by doing such things, This is I always feel that when and usually it's because some Polish colleague or an American colleague at an American university says to me, "Oh, this is a good brand new book. You should read it." So I do my duty as a political scientist. I read it and then I vomit it out like, "Oh my God, why did I do this?" What? No, I mean I'm a speed reader. With 98%, I can basically finish a 400-page book in about a day, less than a day. Maybe about 4 to 5 hours. If I sit in there, I'll read it 4 hours. A 600-page book, maybe 6 hours. 1,000-page books, maybe 2 days. Novels, different. Novels are slower because, and particularly complicated novels with the complicated structures, I might take 4 times. And if I have to read German or French, it really slows. Once you have to read something in German or French, it slows down to like, instead of, I can only do like 8 pages, 8 to 15 pages for about half hour to 45 minutes, depends on how badly constructed they are. So it's like, reading in different languages slow me down. But in English, I can read science fiction novels. I can do 3 or 4 in a night. Okay, so I remember mostly that I have a very good memory about the things about this. And there's a difference between speed reading or fast reading with retention versus reading with detail and paying it. If something's really important and you have to pay attention to all the structures, right? Then you take more time with it. You slow the reading down and you focus in on the things. And you focus on the details, okay? So therefore, that's the difference. So I read it very fast, so I can do this kind of self-abuse. But it is self-abuse because you feel yourself, sometimes you read these things and you feel so dumb, okay? Because you feel like, oh my God, this person is silly, they're saying this, don't they have any kind of common sense? I mean, really, don't they have any self-awareness? And what's so funny is often they will accuse other people of the very thing that they themselves are doing, which is annoying. Oh no, but this is a problem. Self-awareness. You need to be self-aware. If you're not self-aware. So again, all this is very much, this argument of this inevitability towards democracy is very much a major phenomena of the liberal mind. That liberal democracy is uniform and everyone has to be liberal democracy. The problem is a lot of people don't want to be. A lot of the developing world doesn't want it for some reason. You can say, and then the attitude is, oh, because they're back. You have to get into a kind of automatic conception that therefore these people are backwards or uninformed or being misled, or in other words, you have to attribute, or they're being lied to or deceived. In other words, the other people have to be not intelligent enough to understand that they should abandon this way of life. Okay, this is the arrogance that's implied often. Okay, that's enough of my rant. I'm sorry. But second question here is regime change only happens over big informal changes. False. Why? Because it can happen over small changes, but they can also happen. Why? It doesn't have to happen a formal change. It can be informal changes. Okay, so it's remember, logically big and formal. Anytime you have, that's an and, right? You have an and statement. They both have to be true. They don't have to be big, and they don't have to be formal. Now we're going to have another problem soon. We're going to see it. Revolution is not a variety of regime change. This is false. Revolution is the extreme. Revolution is and civil war often, but not always, is the extreme example of a regime change. Okay, not every regime change is revolution, but all revolutions are a form of regime change. Okay. 4. There are set patterns to the directions of that revolutions occur. Now, technically, this is true because but however, if I used because I didn't use a definite article. If I use the definite article, there are if I say there is one pattern or a set, a limited set of patterns, then I could have said, okay, that would have worked. That would have been false. If I limited somehow, I said there's a pattern, okay, set of patterns. There's not a set pattern, one pattern, but a set are set patterns. Now these set patterns are various. There's not one. There's not a single pattern. There's no circle, the famous circle, right? But certain regimes will tend to go in other certain characters. You rarely will get a tyranny turning into aristocracy. You can have a tyranny turning into monarchy, maybe a tyranny reverting to oligarchy. Sometimes you have a tyranny going into democracy, but you're not going to have a tyranny going into aristocracy or a tyranny going into some certain other forms. Okay, so oligarchies and democracy tends to go both to tyranny. You rarely will have aristocracies or democracies go to aristocracies. Oligarchies may. Oligarchies, for some reason, may go towards an aristocratic form. If the forces within this regime, there are enough aristocratic forces in the regime to push the regime overall to an aristocratic characteristic. But there are patterns, okay? It's not just, in other words, there's not no pattern, but there are a set series of patterns. Now 5. When a ruling part changes its character, this can lead to the change in the political regime. That's true. In other words, the ruling part, if it changes, that's a change in the ruling part is a form of political change, regime change. 6, once a revolution occurs, there's no going back to the previous regime in the future. That is false. You may not immediately be able to go back to it, but sometimes you are able to go back to it. Again, this is a weird thing about this. But you can return over time. Something can reset and go back to the original form. This idea that once you take a change, there's nothing is it's irreversible. This assumes a certain progress, a progressive construction that is simply just that. It's a nice idea, but it's not true in that sense. Because we see this, we've seen regimes change and then revert back to their form before, again, over time. Number 7, the direction regimes can alter their form, vary to the degree, to the variety of elements and their nature and character that are within the political community. This is saying what? That the variety, the way they can go, regimes can change, alter their form, will depend upon the elements, the variety of elements, and their character, their nature and their character. So therefore, this is true, right? This is because every regime is composed of parts. The parts have different character. Each part may have a different characteristic, a different nature, and therefore the parts and how as they change and as they try to get control over the regime, they become the ruling part. They will reflect the way the regime will change. Okay, this is why they alter. The forms will alter. This is why, like institutions, like, over time, certain institutions will be moved. An institution that is oligarchic in a democracy will act as a pushing force backwards towards oligarchy, where other institutions are popular and move it towards more democratic. Okay, the different institutions themselves will direct and drive things differently. Number 8. Now, this is the trick question. Small or trivial things really cannot cause revolutions. The answer is it's true. Why? The concept, what is a cause, in that sense? The small thing is not really the real cause. Yes, small and trivial things can be a triggering event that causes a big fight or a big change. But the small things alone aren't enough. There are other things underneath that are there. Bigger things, more important things. And those more important things ultimately are the real cause of the thing. The small thing is only the fight, it creates the anger or the I can't take it anymore. It becomes the tipping point, right? That line from Malcolm, tipping point. It becomes the tipping point which moves you to say, okay, I've been angry so long, I've kept my mouth shut, now I'm going to do something, okay? That is that. Number 9, changes of population in a given political community will have little effect on regime change. That's false. If you change the population, the makeup of the society will change. The regime will change. The character of who is the members of a community, the people, the multitude. The multitude and the people who compose the multitude, their way of life and their character and their values, if they change, the multitude changes, the regime will change. And last but not least, changes in economic conditions of a sizable part of the political community may lead to factors that force change under the regime. Again, this is true. What happens when the multitude becomes richer? Let's say segments of the multitude become very rich. What happens? Well, does the regime stay a democracy? No, it becomes more oligarchic. Because what happens is the new rich will work with the old rich to protect their interests against the poor. And therefore, and all of a sudden they become the sizable part. They become the newly rich former multitude, now because of their wealth and their power, along with the old nobility, right, the old rich and old the notables of the previous order, earlier times, they get together and they all of a sudden overpower the regime. They will change the character of the regime. This is what happens. Change to the middle class. The way one of the biggest changes because of from the 1980s to the 2000s in much of the developed world has been the massive destruction of the working middle class, because of the change of work from being industrial society, post-industrial, service economy, now to the technical economy. In other words, the people who make money in certain industries, like elite law, doctors, professions, if they're very good, they make lots of money. And people in the technical professions, computer programs and like that, if they're good and they innovate new things, they become very rich. They can become extremely rich. So much so that they can put the older elites, the older wealthy of the older periods, the industrial age, to shame. Okay, think of people like Bezos. Think of just name them, right? Bezos, Zuckerberg. What's the other guy? Older guy, Gates, Jobs, right? What did they have? Nothing. Maybe some money, maybe some access to some money, but mostly they created with ideas. And they mostly created ideas and concepts, not with anything substantive, right? They didn't really make things that were real. They made programs that ran within things, or made devices that helped design devices. Often they didn't really design the device, but they just provided the vision for the workers that they hired to make the devices, right? Like Steve Jobs never programmed anything. He was all about marketing. He had artistic vision, but he had no technical skills per se. Zuckerberg, okay, is a good programmer, lousy manager, but knows how to knew enough about what not to do to not lose his chance to make this fast fortune. Like, you have to understand how many social media platforms were there back in the 1990s and early thousands. Lots. Why none of them reached the success of Facebook? Because what did Zuckerberg didn't do that all of them immediately did? Advertising. All the other things immediately went advertising. They put advertising. Zuckerberg waited to only just begin advertising very, very late, 2012, 2010, 2012. And then even then, the advertisings were very targeted and very limited. You couldn't, whereas all the other was blanket advertising. If you go to Match Me, go to the other ones. Name me some of the pages like. Instagram is, again, that's much later thing. But I'm thinking about like MySpace and things like that. They were always Tripod, Locos, Lycos. All of these social media sites were notoriously ads are everywhere. If you didn't pay for the service to make it non-ad, you had got stuck with ads on every page, everything. You had about a dozen ads. And that's the first thing that Zuckerberg didn't want to do, put any ads. And because he did that, this is why it grew. It grew so big. In fact, his other genius was what is the real purpose of what is the real benefit of Microsoft, of Facebook? Data and behavior. In other words, what it does, it tracks your behavior. It's the data of what you like, what you don't like, what you do, who do you associate with, where do you go, what do you buy, what do you do, and you're feeding it constantly, real-time information. So therefore, wouldn't marketers love this? This is the marketing wet dream of all time. Of what? This is real-time in politicians. This is why Barack Obama, and then later the Brexit people, and also then the Trump people, the Mercer crew, again with Trues and the Mercer family, which funded both first Cruz, then later Trump. No, Trump funded himself for the most part, but he used it. In other words, he used people like Carroll and Conway knew about Mercer's use of data analytica and the other place, the Cambridge Analytica and the other places, who were what? They were Why did they do it? They worked with Facebook, because why did Facebook want them to work on the elections? Because if they could create an algorithm to micro-target audiences, you don't think this is going to be fantastic benefit for marketing? My wife is a Facebook. My wife is a marketer. One of her jobs is she consults people from social media marketing. Okay, she said it clear. If it was after 2016, the events of 2016, Facebook became far better marketing location than Google, because the information and the algorithmic measurement of behavior it just made it much better. Google was still kind of more blanket ads, and you can see this. My God, look at Go look at any website that uses Google Ads on them, And they're just everywhere. They just follow your pages and they just bomb you with like the same stupid thing. If I see one more tusk ad, right now you're going to be, if you got a web page, right, you notice all of a sudden the tusk people have spent about, I think, a couple million zloty buying ad space on the internet. And almost every other ad you'll see will be an ad about Donald Tusk's birthday and leadership, or something like this. Okay, it's like, oh my God, what's going on? Why am I getting these ads? Stop! I'm reading this web page, right? I'm reading this story I was interested in, and all of a sudden the ads just keep on getting all over the page. You can't read anything because of the ads. So it's like, okay, so that's neither here nor there. Okay, now that's enough. I wasted my time. Now let's go to this. The tools. Last week we started the first 4 things of the tools of administration. Again, the tools of administration are eightfold in this sense. These are the instruments. These are the instruments of statecraft. Political actors, how they can use these tools to exercise to achieve what they want politically in a society. Last lecture we looked at 4 of them, and we're going to finish the last 4 over here in this lecture: diplomacy, force, and intelligence. But I'm going to go over a little. I kind of rushed through education and culture and economics. I just want to review it a little bit about education as a form. Again, education is both. We talked about hard power, soft power a little bit last time. I'm going to continue it because I say education is both a hard power mechanism and a soft power mechanism. The hard power of it is that what? The skills you get, the benefits you get from it, the immediate benefits of it. In other words, as we talk about this, what are the and I forgot to highlight this. Sorry, the last one is, this should be highlighted. This is the 4th place. There are 4 things that public education achieves: civic education, leadership, elite replacement, employment and skill training, and last, self-improvement and entertainment. Okay? In other words, all 4, and actually in education, there's 3 levels of education. There is primary, which is K through 12. Secondary, which is, well, technically it's high school. It's K through 10, and then 11, 12, and 10, 11, 12. That's usually secondary considered. And tertiary, but I've heard different excuses. I heard people say university secondary education. And it really depends on the system of education. A lot of schools, it's K through 12 is primary. Some places it's K through 8, K through 9, and then high school. And high school is basically 4 years or 3 years, depending on the system. Then it can be, the American system. High school is junior high and high school. Okay, so it's 2 and 4. Okay, you have freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors. Right, that's high school. Junior high is great. That, and that's, again, grade 12 is the highest grade, and everything therefore that you have 6 years of high school and 6 years of primary school. We say elementary school, and then you have kindergarten and preschool, so 2 years before that extra. So that's the standard schedule, and that's usually considered primary. I say this is the every literature is different about this. Why it's frustrating. Secondary was normally college, 4-year college, bachelor's degree. And tertiary tended to mean professional education and higher education, graduate schools. Professional educations and graduate schools. Pardon me. I'm getting. Someone's probably saying that. Where are you? Why aren't you? You're at home waiting for packages. That's probably another package guy coming saying, why aren't you there? Secondary schools usually be university. Again, what are these for? Universities were elite placement and skill sets, managers, professionals, the professional class. Then the tertiary schools were again, doctors, lawyers, professions, okay? So employment, skill training, and replacement of leaders. And now this is in democratic societies, the last thing, self-improvement and entertainment. This is uniquely in democratic societies. Because individuals want to improve themselves, for improvement. Usually you find, in America, this is done at the community college level. You can have these courses at community college. Anyone go there. They can retrain. They can train. If you want to retrain, you lost your job. You want to train. There was that funny movie with, what was it? There was a movie with Tom Hanks about a decade ago, where he and Julia Roberts plays a community college teacher, a frustrated community college teacher. And it was about this guy who was a salesman who lost his job at a big, like Amazon, not Amazon, but a Walmart kind of shopping place. And that he went back to community college in order to kind of restructure his life, rediscover himself, okay? Because he never got a college degree. And the only reason why he never became a manager before was because without the college degree, he couldn't have got the manager post. Okay, gatekeeping. I mean, you understand that. What are university degrees mostly for? Gatekeeping. High school degrees no longer, used to be the high school diploma used to be the gatekeeper. Now it's the 4 years bachelor's degree. And even now master's degrees in the place of the gatekeeping degree for employment, okay? It's called inflation, gatekeeping inflation. So self-improvement, self-attainment, these are things. And we have to understand that the culture, the connection between elite is the elites, elite universities like Oxford, Cambridge in England, American Ivy League, American Big Ten, these places tended to produce the elites, the hyper elites of the situation. That's why, and if you understand the Big Ten, all the big schools were regional. They produce regional, localized elites in America. They're spread out. Now, the famous elite, the European one, the military schools, I didn't mention West Point for the U.S., but that's, West Point was created right around the 18 teens. But the French is Saint Cyrs in France, or the old German Kriegsakademie, the War Academy, which after Weimar kind of stopped. Not even after Weimar, after even post Weimar. Even before the Nazis, this was killed. This was killed after World War I. But this was the old Prussian Kriegsakademie. And then de Gaulle's famous establishment of his favorite school, the École Nationale d'Administration, where all the political elites used to come from, until Sarkozy. Sarkozy and Chirac were the new elite who didn't go to the École. They were business school and business managers. But before this, the tradition of France political thing, from basically 1954, 1956, when the Fifth Republic was created by de Gaulle, until the 1990s, you had to become a politician in France. You had to be a graduate of the École Nationale of Administration. Okay. In other words, the schools were the elite. It's like in Russia, the Gitmo, the School of Higher International Relations. There's certain schools, yet if you're not a graduate of this school, you're not allowed to go into certain key positions of power. This is the role of education and elite selection, okay? Culture, we talk about this, the role of culture in society. It reinforces cultural identity, cultural notations. It's educatory at one level, but it's also value assertive and value association of it. But it also acts as a form of education. It also acts as a form of entertainment as well. Mass culture, pop culture is again as much about entertainment as it is about information. Sports is a form of education. Sports is both a form of education and a form of entertainment. And it's also a form of civic building. In other words, this is I don't like Europe. Europe is not a civic culture society. Why? Because sports are for experts, not for everyone. How much did you all have to do soccer in high school?
Not necessarily.
Yeah, in America we had gym. And gym, Patricia?
Hola, Alexandra.
Alexander, okay, Tim. Okay, and whoever has I have the attendance sheet, please. In America, all throughout our primary education, we all had gym. And what gym was, mostly, was kickball, basketball, sports, where we all learned how to play. Everyone had to play things. We had a dance. During the winter time, we had dancing. We had square dancing, or some kind of formal dance, that everyone had to learn square dancing, and everyone was embarrassing. Like all the girls, but they had forced to do this. And then sometimes you had weightlifting. Some people went basketball, some people went weightlifting, some people went archery, but then it was all required. Everyone had to do this. And then there was team sports. Every school had team sports. Football, basketball, some places baseball, not all, but baseball. Some had golf teams, archery teams, cross-country teams.
Did every single student have to be in at least one team?
That was volunteer.
Exactly. We have in.
Yeah, but you have to go to Avu.
I
know, but you have to go to Ova. You have to go to a different school. This was within. Not always, but a lot of places don't.
Sometimes some schools have small teams.
Yeah, but here every school has a team, and the only people who get, in other words, anyone can apply, but only the best get on the team. In other words, everyone is encouraged to go do things, but there's competition, and therefore there's only so many slots on the team, and there's rules in basketball and baseball, this games. You can only have a team of this much people on your bench, no more. Okay? Or otherwise your team gets removed from the competitions. And they compete with each other. Okay? This is even done in the college level. This is how colleges make, and this is big, this is rivalry. In America, sports plays a big, particularly American football, basketball. It's very much, even high school games are very competition, okay? And so much so that professional teams come look at the team players. Not only college, they sometimes recruit, right now, they're recruiting from high school, okay? Skipping college, okay? But again, what is, people think, in America, some people hate this. Europe, this is not there, Does Warsaw University have a sport team?
I think we do.
Now, come on, really? Do you do? Then you go to the games and cheer them on? Do they compete with other? Is there competition between here and Krakow? Yearly competition?
Basketball, yes.
Yeah, basketball, yes, because the Olympics.
There might be, but I don't know.
I attended last Tuesday.
Okay, so therefore it's there, but it's not. But this is not something that the school really supports,
Yeah, exactly.
and doesn't encourage, and doesn't make money from it.
You asked if we go and cheer
Yeah.
others people on. Why would we? Most people probably don't care. I don't care.
Well, no, but that's how
It's
civic.
sports.
But hate to say this, that is a form of civic identity. It's loyalty to the school. There's no loyalty to your institution here, where American students have loyalty to their institutions. They really go to reunions. They go to. In other words, this is how you build social capital. You're going to be reading in other classes. You're going to be reading about Putnam, talking about the role of social capital and social solidarity. How do you form social solidarity? Sport, by the way, how do you create leaders? If you don't think playing sports teach you cooperation, playing competitive sports teach you cooperation, teamwork, and the ability, and some of the people will become leaders. Okay? This is the formation of democratic society. Or not a civil, not necessarily democratic, but a civil society which must precede democracy. If you don't have a healthy civil society with private institutions that form social habits, that form social solidarity, social trust, and social capital, your democracy won't work. In other words, sports teams, sports activities, you might not like it, we might not do it, but it is the mechanism by which people learn to cooperate, learn to form teamwork, learning how to cooperate. I mean, this is one of the Polish bad habits. You know, you have a problem as cooperating. Most of you don't cooperate. If you do, it's kind of like one person does the work and all the other people follow. Why? Because there's kind of peer pressure on the smart. If he or she doesn't do the work, that person will be excluded, and the other people either bring that person in because they can't do the work themselves. Right? This is the common problem. I see, as a teacher, I see this. When I do team exercises, it's always obvious who's done the work. You know. There's no real division of labor in things like these. The intelligent students are forced to do. The intelligent students buy friendship and by acceptance by doing the work and not complaining about it. This is a leftover from communism. Because in other words, and cheating and bad grades. Again, this is cheating and doing things like this. This is, again, another leftover from communism and peasant society. Why? Because cheating, this way you have dirty hands and you can't challenge the regime. Everyone who's cheated, therefore, is guilty is unethical. And therefore, if you're unethical, how dare you challenge the regime in the party? They want you to cheat. They want you to lie. They want you to do corrupt things. Why? Because you don't have clean hands and therefore you can't challenge us. This is typical techniques of tyrannical regimes, how to perpetuate themselves. Make the people bad. Make them corrupt. Make them lazy and corrupt. Encourage them doing a corrupt behavior, bad deviant behavior. Bad regimes love deviancy. In fact, any corrupt regime that punishes deviancy is unintentionally working against itself. If you're a corrupt regime, you should love deviant behavior. Why? Because it makes it impossible for the society ever to stand up to challenge you and overcome it. So education, thus, sports education is a very thing of teamwork, exercising. It's entertainment, one level, the people who watch it, but doing it, it's a form of education. And leadership, creating of leaders, the future leaders in the society. Come on, this is another thing. In American society, who tends to become the local politicians? The stars of the stars of the high school teams and the college teams. Why? The stars tend to be what? Usually tend to be leaders, the people who led their teams. They tended to be the ones who performed well, and they also tended to, you have to understand, athletic prowess is the closest imitation of virtue there is. The classical understanding of virtue. Classical virtue is doing an action well, beautifully. An excellent player, when you have a very good athlete playing the game perfect, like playing his sport, what he's doing, and he's doing it excellently and well, right? This is the closest example we have to ancient virtue that we know. Because the ancient concept of virtue, the Greek conception of arete, was doing an action beautifully, performing it at the right way, the right time, in the right direction. This is what virtue meant. Doing a thing, doing an action. In other words, if I had a course in ethics, I'd talk about, courage is a virtue. What does it mean? Courage does not mean being foolhardy. It's it's responding to fear. How do you respond to fear? Do you ignore it? Because remember, fear is useful information. In other words, if you just don't pay attention to fear and act that's not there, you can end up, you shouldn't. In other words, you shouldn't ignore fear, but you shouldn't succumb to fear. In other words, you need to master fear. Not ignore it, not pretend it doesn't exist, recognize the reality of the situation, but at the same time not succumb to it. That's courage. Okay? This would, and moderation, again, moderation is desire, our desires, our wants. Not simply abstaining, not doing it like this, but not also not giving in to them. I can admit I'm a failure in moderation, but in the sense that the virtue would be a person who would be able to enjoy the pleasures, but not that they've harmed. They can do it well, beautifully, in other words. So this is the idea of virtue, the understanding, an action, virtue in action. Sports is a way that you can learn virtue. Learning how to be the, and what is political actors? Political actors have to learn, political action is virtue also, learning how to make the right choice and the right decision. Prudence is the action of making the right decision in life. Deciding what to do and how to do it and the direction to do it, this is prudence. This is an intellectual virtue, deciding. But this requires, and in order to do a virtue, you must understand the phenomenon, understand what you're doing in a way that you're be able to do it the right way. So therefore, this is why these things are important, intellectual. Therefore, education is what? Education is habit forming. You form habits. The habits, and therefore sports are habits. The educational aspect of habits, learning to cooperate. You're playing the games, you learn to cooperate with each other. You're learning what? Timing. You're learning how, when is a decision, when is an action appropriate, and when it's not appropriate. In other words, these skills you learn in sports and other activities, social activities, can't be transferred to life. In business as well, and all sorts of things. Economics, this is simple stuff. This is economic in the sense that we use policy economics. Remember all things it's about carrots and sticks. And so therefore we have the capitalist market framework, right? The market, the regulation, the enforcement of regulations, monetary systems, capital markets, banks, and other monetary policies. Again, this is the action of state, like money. Money is occurring in the money supply. And the spending and public spending and how money is collected, taxation. Whether the government does taxes directly, you know the difference between, okay. I really don't like VAT taxes. Why? Because it's a way that only the poor pay for taxes. VAT taxes, only the lower classes are the loser on VAT taxes. Why? Because the poorer people, the lower populations of economic status only consume. Remember how VAT works. If I'm producing something, I can write off the VAT I pay, right? So the very wealthy find mechanisms to do what? Pay no VAT. They hire lawyers and hire the people so they can get away with buying expensive cars, expensive things, and ultimately pay no VAT for them. Where you pay the 23%. And by the way, VAT you see the VAT price, but you don't feel it, because why? In America, sales tax versus VAT tax. In America, every buyer feels and you resent the sales tax in America. Why? Because you buy something, it says one price, and you go to the cash register, you have to pay more. You don't, in other words, the price does not include tax. So therefore, people become resentful of the tax. But VAT is, you see the price, is the tax is paid in, you don't think about how much, you don't feel that. My God, if American states had 23% sales tax, they would be armed. The most American states have is 9 to 10%. Okay? Complicated tax systems only benefit the wealthy. because the wealthy can afford the lawyers in order to avoid finding loopholes in the system. Okay, so therefore, you can tell what kind of society, in a more democratic society, the tax system should be simple. Should be straightforward. Shouldn't be against the people. All of these tools of economy are what? These are regime specific. These are tools of, the tax policy is a form of achieving things. You need resource, the state needs resources to deliver services. Extraction. It needs to extract from the society in order to achieve services. So that they need what? They need the question of research management, both human, natural resources and human, both man-made and also of human beings. Okay, of human resources. There's two. There is things that men make, and the men themselves, human beings themselves. Next, we have energy, food, resources, etc. It's production and procurement. Buying and selling, right? Production, making, procurement is buying and selling. Commerce. And then we have reform and then modernization efforts of the mechanism of economies. Every time there's reforming of economy, trying to make it better, more efficient, to allow for more government revenues and things like this. All of these aspects of economy. Now today, finally we're getting into today's themes. Diplomacy. Diplomacy is a tool. What is it? Diplomacy is the profession, the activity, or the skill of managing, now this is international relations, but all relations, typically of a country and its representatives board. Diplomacy usually means foreign, okay? But it also means negotiating. So diplomacy can be used in an internal situation among different groups, mediators and negotiators. So this can be used, it's typically understood as relations between states, but it's also in a political system, diplomacy is a skill necessary to get the different sets of people to work together and cooperate. It is the art of dealing with people in a sensitive and tactful way. That's the cheap everyday version of it. Diplomacy, verbal communication, communicates realities that may move nations. It is not to be confused with particular messaging diplomats may carry. So it's signals. It's about how do you message things, how do you communicate, how do you do. It's not necessary, as it says, with particular messages a diplomat may carry, or with its effect. While military, this is the other thing. This is one thing. Diplomacy deals with the communicate. While military action, not to be confused with war, physically communicates a government's wishes. In other words, diplomacy is one thing, but military action is another form of communication. It does so physically. There's verbally versus physically. In other words, having your armies do things, come on. Sending a whole bunch of B-52s to fly nonstop 72 hours over the Baltic. Is that communicating a message to Russia right now?
Definitely.
You understand? In other words, you can do things. Communication is not just with words, it's also with actions and behaviors. So diplomacy actually involves also, in other words, military aspects of diplomacy. In other words, wishing to try to sweep away resistance to them. Whereas diplomacy represents realities, military options create them. Okay? In other words, diplomacy deals with tries to what? Represent the realities. The military options create the realities. Force creates. Diplomacy is often popularly thought of as peaceful alternative to violence, but in fact, diplomacy serves to prepare as often as to avoid war. The common perception is diplomacy is peaceful and military. No, it's not true. Diplomacy is as much to avoid, but also to prepare. It is an important part of waging war. It often makes the difference who wins and always codifies war's results. In other words, after you win the war, you have to negotiate with everyone to codify the results. So that the rules, they make the new rules. So diplomacy in other words, diplomacy is not merely, it is very much tied to war, not an opposition to war in force, and also military force. Again, diplomacy is the verbal representation of compelling realities, again, international realities I put here, but realities, and military force is one of those realities. Diplomacy is tied to negotiating, bargaining, threatening, signaling things, words, actions, behaviors that will cause you to act hostilely to those who do or say those things. You signal saying, if you do that, or say that or that, I'm gonna not like it. You warn people this way, right? Don't do this. If you do it, I'm gonna punish you. You know, this is a classic mechanism. Signaling to say this is the line that if you cross it, I will act. And that becomes a demarcation situation where the other person knows that, okay, if I go beyond that, I have to be ready to be punished or get retaliation. It also deals with helping others, especially outside actors, know what you want from them specifically or in general. In other words, diplomacy, you have to make it, okay, making sure that everyone knows what you want. It's kind of fucked up when I've worked with people who never tell you what they want, or what they say they want is never what they want. You ever had to deal with that kind of person? It's frustrating, because why? Because these people this is a clusterfuck, as they're saying in politics. Because you can never satisfy them, and if you try doing what they say, they don't want what they say. Because usually, they do not, you have to know what you want, and you have to communicate to others what you want. If you don't do those two things, things don't work. And things go badly. This is one of the classic errors in politics. Being unclear with what you want. I mean, the classic example of all the big disasters. Look at the Vietnam War. I mean, there's a great movie called Path to War, HBO movie. I think it was done like in early 1990s, early 2000s, with a lot of good actors are in it. But the most famous actor is Donald Sutherland. He plays Clark Clifford. But then, and a very famous actor plays Lyndon Johnson. But the Robert McNamara character was played by Baldwin, which one? Alec Baldwin. He played Robert McNamara's character. It's all about LBJ's getting himself into Vietnam and how it destroyed his presidency. And what was the goal? The goal was never winning. Winning in Vietnam was getting Ho Chi Minh to Vietnam, the winning position of LBJ in Vietnam was not defeating the Viet Cong or defeating the North Vietnamese. It was about getting the North Vietnamese to negotiate. So should you have entered a war? Is that a worthwhile goal to send boys to die for, just to negotiate? Because his theory, if I just get Ho Chi Minh at my table, I can negotiate spending, typical Democratic politician, I'm going to give you lots of money. Ho Chi Minh didn't want any money. He wanted everyone out of his country, and he wanted to, if he was really the communist he was going to cooperate with help the other communists to capture the rest of Southeast Asia, right? We have to understand. We don't fully know how true of a communist Ho Chi Minh really was. Was he really just a nationalist using communism to achieve certain ends, as originally Sun Yat-sen was? Sun Yat-sen was kind of a communist in his early thing, a socialist at least. Come on, even Pilsudski was a socialist, wasn't he?
He was leader of PPS.
But then he joked off. He once he got nationhood, he got off the socialist train, right? He wasn't in other words, he was using socialism to achieve nationalist goals. And that could have been true with Ho Chi Minh. We don't know. Because he died before we could get the benefit of this. But what happened? The Americans lost Vietnam because why? Because we didn't want to win it. That was the whole debate. If you're going to wage a war, you got to wage to win it. You got to send boys to die. How do you win wars? Well, you don't only bomb the shit out of them. You invade North Vietnam. Did the American army ever set a foot in North Vietnam? No. We bombed North Vietnam. Why? To prevent them to stop them supplying the Viet Cong in the South. Okay. So ironically, if America was fighting Vietnam in Russia right now, what we should be doing is giving them ICBM rockets without nukes and let them blow the hell out of Moscow and other Russian cities. Okay. We're not even playing Vietnam. Okay, in this situation. So you have to understand that the Vietnam was a disaster. Why? Because you had an unclear goal. You didn't have a clear set of activities. You didn't know what you really want. You didn't signal it to everyone right. And then when Nixon took over, his goal was peace with honor. Not victory, withdrawal. But withdrawal on the best face forward. And then what does withdrawal means? Selling the South Vietnamese, our allies, out. And this is the famous line. You heard what Kissinger said, right? Kissinger, this is one of the ironies. What did Kissinger get a peace prize for? Because of the treaty that ended Vietnam, right? The North Vietnamese co-signer didn't show up for the award ceremony. Didn't accept his Nobel Prize. Why? He joked, "I'm honest, Kissinger's not." Because they knew that the peace prize was meaningless. It was the Americans selling out their ally to getting out of South Vietnam. And America paid for that for 10 years on, after 1974, for nearly up until 1980, the Americans suffered because of that. Because the Russians and the communists were getting the upper hand. They made moves in South America, and they made moves in Africa, and they were winning. And then Reagan changed the game by changing the arms race. Why? Because once the Americans decided to build a new military force, or technological, and also, two of my favorite science fiction writers, and who I knew, went to see him because of Ed Meese, got him through the triad, and talked him into building a strategic defense initiative. In other words, end mutual assured destruction and create, using computer technology and new lasers and new technology, we could outcompete the Russians, because the Russian system could not innovate and make new computers. And with microcomputers and renewed technology, we could make intercontinental ballistic missiles obsolete. Intercept them, first with either lasers, particle beams, or kinetic energy weapons, missiles or rock throwers, Gauss cannons. Which we're doing this now. We have the technology to shoot out. You're going to get that. You're going to get the Aegis system. You know that the naval system, the Aegis system, is being built in Poland on land, and this is going to provide anti-ballistic missile capacity, theater-based capacity, making basically the nuclear shield. They innovated. Instead of the old nuclear shield, you're going to get the new, a kind of innovated one, with the Israelis' Iron Dome together. So therefore, this is the way you get this. Again, this is your signal devices, signal technique. Force. We talked about this kind of ahead of the game. What is it? Force is the hard power of hard power. Force has two things. It's mostly coercion. There's two realms of coercion. Internal and external. Internal is usually law enforcement or maintaining civil peace and civil order. Okay? The external aspect of this is war. As Clausewitz says, what is war but politics by other means? War is an extension of politics. War is also a bad thing, is that war is basically the imposition of complete violence. In fact, the argument was that war was the worst thing men could do to each other. I mean, really, without war, things like genocide is not possible. Genocide always emerged in the scope of war. Either civil war or war between states. Without war, there is not, you don't have genocide usually. This is why the old order, the purpose of the international system was to avoid war, try to limit war. But what happened was, ironically, with the post-World War II, we argued that there's something worse than war now, human rights violations. But the danger with that human rights violations are worse than war, this creates war. In other words, you have to intervene. If there's human rights violations, you have to intervene. This reverts us to the pre-Westphalian world. Because that's what do you think the world pre-Westphalia? I didn't like your religion, because your religion is you're not practicing the right religion, because that means you're going to hell. Therefore, to save the poor, the subjects, I'm going to invade you. In other words, isn't that human rights violations? And when the argument is, human rights violations are the new religion in that sense. Human rights is the new religion, and therefore we're returning to the war of religions, where we're using military intervention as a means to prevent heresy, bad human rights. You use hard power. You don't think the EU is using hard power against countries that they think that are not following their own conception of rule of law? So what is the military action or threat to military action? Now the zones are this. The zones of war, zone of conflict, both internal and external, are land, physical, territorial things like land, the physical world, the physical environment of this. Sea, oceans, waterways, and things like that. Air, helicopters, air, space. Then what else? Space. This is another zone of things. You don't think you can, come on, you know what the best weapon there is? Throwing down rocks. Take a 200-ton thing in space. Go get some asteroids. Mine some rocks from the moon and throw the rocks towards Earth. And doing it a certain way, you can the kinetic energy impact of a rock being thrown 5,000 miles to 10,000 miles an hour or higher. When it hits as it falls to Earth, the acceleration is 32 feet per second squared. So first of all, just imagine, if it's already going about 6,000 or 7,000 miles an hour, 10,000 miles an hour. Imagine if the acceleration rate now increases 32 feet per second squared. You know what happens at a certain point? Something that doesn't get burnt through, but is a solid core of anything like tungsten or ore, like tungsten ore, or even uranium or anything really solid that doesn't melt. You know what happens when that hits the Earth ground at that speed? Thermonuclear explosion. You get fusion. You don't need to have an atomic warhead. You can create an atomic warhead by throwing something so fast at something, when it hits the terminal velocity, that the solid object can cause fusion explosion. That's a mini atomic bomb in itself. In other words, a hypertonic electric rifle with a tungsten core bullet that comes out of that thing at, let's say, 30,000 miles per second. When it hit a tank, particularly with titanium ore on armor, what would happen? You could have a fusion reaction. Again, this is the problem. This is the dirty secret of what fusion nuclear weapons are. It's a lot of it. What do you think wiped out the dinosaurs? Probably 1,000 warheads of rock, tungsten, or big one. That was, you see the crater in North America, right? We know the big crater in North America. There's 5 or 6 big craters in the world. Each one of these were done, we know, by a big giant rock that came into about 60 to 70,000, maybe even up. The last two was about 50,000, 60,000. The big one was in Siberia, 50,000, 60,000 years ago. But before that, the bigger ones are about 150,000, 250,000 years ago. So what does that mean? So space is a big, very much it's the next generation warfare. Okay? What about this? The means to use force. Again, military, land, sea, air, space, and cyber. Social security services. And then law enforcement, police and law enforcement. Regarding war, the connection between the ends and means determine the character of actions. In other words, the ends, the goals you're trying to achieve, and the means you achieve them. War always has to take ends and means in consideration. In other words, you have to know what you want, and you have to use what you need. You need to use the amount of force you need to accomplish it. War is a military object tailored to achieve one's preferred peace. The goal is not to live in war always. That's unstable. The goal of war is to establish order again and to establish peace. Peace is always the end of war. If it isn't, if you're not trying to establish peace or a stable situation, then that's a recipe for disaster. Anyone who wants war for war's sake, that is nihilistic madness. You won't survive. You only destroy everything. There are lots of people who want to destroy everything, burn things down. Come on, how many of you have seen the movie Joker? Okay. Arthur Dent is the type of person who just wants to burn the world down, doesn't he? What? What? Yeah. Okay, but why? What is the motivation? What is his real motivation moment of why he wants to build the world down?
He despises the system.
No, he also despises himself. Self-pity. Okay. In other words, people who feel themselves victims to the degree of a self-pity, who then become to despise the world that they live in and wish to destroy it at all costs. And these people are the people, that's Hitler. No, really, that's Hitler. The jokers of the world, if they get power, they will only destroy, they will produce madness. Hitler never wanted peace. He was angry. He achieved, what he achieved in Munich was brilliant. Why? He got the Western powers to give him exactly what he wanted and he had to do nothing. And he was angry because he didn't get to fight. Imagine, think about this. Hitler was furious at all. He despised Chamberlain. Chamberlain was a weak little, the French and Chamberlain were nothing. Why? They caved. Right? That's how mad he was. He was able, in other words, if he was a real rational actor trying to achieve his goals, he would have been happy. I was able to con them to give me this. And he could have probably gotten away with even Poland if he didn't. But he forced Poland's. He could have gotten away with a lot if he behaved differently. In other words, if he negotiated with the British more honestly very on, he probably would have gotten the British and French to give up very easily. And particularly if he didn't do the thing that really undid him with the British ultimately and the French was the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Because the only reason why why did the French and the British, particularly the British conservatives, didn't turn a blind eye to him? Because he was the bulwark against communism. Why did that England and France would not have to fight the Bolsheviks? This is why the British conservatives turned a blind eye to. They didn't have to spend money on war. Because the real threat here is always going to be the Bolsheviks, the Russians. They weren't wrong. The Bolsheviks were a threat, but the Brits had no stomach. The Brits and the French had no stomach for a war like World War I again. Particularly the French. And so therefore that's what the danger of this. So therefore, insofar as military operations is so crafted as to bring about the desired peace, does it qualify an active war as opposed to senseless violence? I would argue the whole Afghan operation was senseless violence. 20 years of complete senseless violence. Why? As of September 2019, when the Americans left, 2021, when the Americans left, who was back in charge of Afghanistan? So therefore, we entered the war with that to remove Taliban power from Afghanistan. So we waged a 20-year war, over 20-year war, in order to achieve what? Nothing. That's even worse than World War I. You think World War I produced Nazis and authoritarian parties? Oh yeah, World War I did just... The feeling of betrayal of the German soldiers, how they felt betrayed, both by the socialists who created Weimar, but also by the Western powers, the liberal powers that punished Weimar and punished them. They came back with the idea. First of all, the army felt it was stabbed in the back. They didn't lose. They were betrayed by the revolutionary government. And that when they came back, it was they who saved the revolutionary government from the communists. Remember all the volunteer army militia groups that became private militias who then killed Rosa Luxemburg in Berlin and kicked out the socialists. And remember, Berlin and in Munich, they were socialist ruled. That wasn't. There were all these socialist, communist worker groups ruling all of Eastern Europe at that time. Little takeovers, right? And what did they do? They had the armies come and the various military units came and kicked the ex-soldiers came back, armed to the teeth with war and killed the revolutionaries. All right, and established the post-war moment. So this is the structure of this. Only from the perspective of peace do you desire the peace you desire. Is it possible to identify what stands in the way? So what is the peace that you desire? And what stands in the way of that peace? In other words, what stands in the way? The people, the institutions, the things, the removal of which will give you the peace you want. What is the peace you want, and who stands in the way? What persons, institutions, or things you have to remove to get the peace you want? And what does he say here? Only what this is from Alexander Kotvila, usually. This is Kotvila's lines. Only once you have figured out that does it make any sense to think of whom to kill and what to destroy. And then, sequentially, to ask, what will it take, and hence, to design military operations? See, it's not, real effective killing is you have to know who to kill, what needs to be done, who has to be done, who has to be eliminated, and you got to eliminate them. If you don't do that, what happens? This is the famous, and that's right from the Prince. Machiavelli Prince makes this big point. What is cruelty? Cruelty, violence, well used, achieves peace. Cruelty, violence, if it's well used, this is going to achieve. But cruelty, poorly used, or piety, or pity shown, that stops violence, can be what he coins a term, the cruel piety, impious cruelty. In other words, there's a cruelty that happens because of your pity and your piety. He makes another point. If you're gonna take out the enemies and deal with things, do it right away. Don't do it one at a time over time. Why? If you kill everyone, you kill all you have to kill at one time, and you don't kill anyone else after that, people will get over it. But if you're always killing people, you kind of say, I'm not going to kill everyone now, I'm going to show mercy, but then you have to keep on using the knife. And because you're constantly using the knife, or the violence, people constantly remember this, they live in fear. You don't want people living in fear. You have to, if you have to use violence, use the violence quickly. That's from the Prince. This is the great lesson of the Prince. This is cruelty well used. A good prince, a good leader, needs to know when he has to be cruel. And this is a great management decision. Come on. If you have to fire people, fire them all at once. Don't fire them all. Because if everyone is being fired all the time, what happens? The panic in other words, the system can't operate. You need people to feel safe, to feel comfortable, to be able to work, to cooperate, to work things. So if you're going to have to make drastic physical cuts, you need to do them quickly and effectively and completely. Don't say, I feel bad for him. I have to let him. In other words, and then 3 months later you have to let him go anyways. But what happens then, therefore, everyone is seeing you constantly cutting. Force again. Once the killing starts, the options narrow to two: victory or defeat. And why is that so important? Because before entering a war, to calculate what it takes to pay the price for victory and whether you're ready and willing and able to pay it. You have to be, in other words, you're not willing to pay the price of victory, don't play the game. This is chicken. You know what chicken is? The American car game. Kids who play the car, they hot rodders would run a car directly at each other, and the first person who swerves.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, chicken. Okay, the rule of chicken is, don't play it if you can't crash your car. If you're not willing to crash the car into the other guy, don't play.
It's in Poland. It's called game.
You have to. It's like Russian roulette. If you're not willing to pay the price, you don't play the game. And therefore, what happens? The second the person values his life rather than winning, they will swerve to defeat this. So you have to really say, I want to win, therefore I'm willing to die to win. You have to crash your car, be willing, and accept you're going to crash your car into their car. If you can't do that, don't play the game. That's politics also, come on. If you're, one of the biggest mistakes that happened in the 1996 election, when Republicans shut the government down, if you weren't willing to shut the government down and take the blame for it, then you ended up losing against the Democrats and Clinton. So therefore, if you're going to do something, an action, you've got to be willing to live with the consequences of what is the cost of victory. Is the cost worth the victory? He talks about Machiavellian discourses say you should avoid fights even by negotiating preemptive surrenders. Keeping your forces out of situations they can't win or can't or won't handle. Avoid routes, maintain some control of the situation is worth the price. But once the fighting starts, the passions and hatreds that excites eliminates that option. So before war, you can negotiate a peace, even a losing peace. But once the fighting starts, you either have to do what? Win or lose. Intelligence, so this is the big thing about intelligence. This is the gathering information necessary for political actions. The capacity to make decisions about policy, law enforcement, execution of both, to make decisions. Now, it is about the information political actors and decision makers need to have. Again, there's 4 stages. These are the stages: collection, processing, checking, confirming, and executing. It is also making sure the information you have is real and not fake. Also, collections and verification also rises the problem of countering an action and attempts of disinformation and deceit actors are doing or engaging against you. This is counterintelligence. In other words, how do you respond to their deceits and misinformations and actions? The counters. So you trying to find out what you need to know, and then you need to counter what they're doing. Okay, the two sides of one is your side, one is countering them, your enemy. But this is also a history of but it's also a history of bureaucracy and problems with structures that have insular and being myopic, i.e., the failures of intelligence agencies are legendary. Pearl Harbor, fall of the Soviets. In fact, another thing. Even when intelligence don't win conflict. If the goodness of your intelligence agency won you wars, then the Soviets should have won the Cold War. The KGB was the master spy agency. The Americans and the Brits were complete bozos. The Americans were amateur incompetents. The Americans are complete fuck-ups on intelligence. There's a saying, you could always tell a CIA operation. Why? Because everyone but the target was killed. The CIA was notoriously incompetent, easily infiltrated by the communists. It always picked idiots. Come on, think about it. It was an elite institution of college frat boys of the Yale Skull and Crossbones. Hired socialist, revolutionary, and communist intellectuals. Come on, you ever heard of Marcuse, Assur, all these intellectuals, the Frankfurt School, and all these people, these Jewish communists? Oh, yeah. These were in the CIA. They formed the CIA, original OSS and then CIA. Yes?
I thought you said that hiring ex-sports leaders from high schools was a good idea.
Well, no, but not this. Depends on what you're dealing with. This is, you don't want. Because not every expert is really an expert, and Marxist experts are experts, but not on good things. They're usually bad things. Okay, and they sought to infiltrate the system. They agreed to infiltrate the system to defeat Hitler, but then their goal was not only defeating Hitler, but destroying capitalism as well. So it was once in the system, they corrupted the system from inside. Okay, so that the secret of intelligence, even if you win, the Americans won the Cold War not because of intelligence, but in spite of bad intelligence. Okay. Another thing about intelligence. What is the fact and variable? In other words, facts or variable information is much subjective the actor needs. Valuable intelligence, very much the eye of the beholder. In other words, it's very subjective. What is good and useful information is very subjective. It's eye of the beholder. So what is also a problem is too many people don't realize that there's a fundamental difference between what is a fact and the interpretation of a fact. Facts are themselves are subjective. But then interpreting of facts are not the same thing as a fact. And often people mistake the interpretation of a fact, which is very subjective, to a fact that once we can agree on a fact as a fact. In other words, but interpretations don't always get that level of agreement. This is why disinformation is a problem, because there's disagreement about these, because of the disconnect between these two things and the subjectivity of the phenomena in question. It is also a tool of intelligent statecraft. Disinformation or active measures was the genius of Soviet KGB statecraft. To understand powers of active measures, I would advise you to go watch the videos of Yuri Bizimov on YouTube. He was a former KGB activist, special things. He defected in 1979 from India to the first escape to the United States and then Canada. These are very good. Now, last but not least for that thing is communication. Communication is what? Well, this is a system of transmitting information. Internal political system communications, external communications, public information, public diplomacy, propaganda, messaging, signaling. Not only of what's being it is not only what being communicated, but how or what means it's being communicated. Sometimes the means of communication changes the message. Communications continue. This is from the leader. Leaders to subordinates within the system, to followers and supporters within the society, to supporters outside or beyond the society, to opponents inside the regime system, to opponents inside the society, to opponents outside the regime or beyond the society, to the unaffected or disaffected in the society. And from the key deputies within the regime or the government to superiors or leaders, or likewise here, from subordinates within the regime to government to superiors or to sub-leaders. So therefore, these are the key deputies and these are subordinates. Levels of government, right, and how they communicate. The government, a regime itself, has to have communication within it to function properly, okay? If communication is not functioning properly, the government doesn't work right. And there needs to be communication between the government and the political system at large, and also the society within and to other societies, okay? From the supporters within a society or either petty officials or mid-range or senior officials, from opponents within the society to either petty officials and mid-range officials, and from the unaffected or disaffected within the society to either petty officials or mid-range or senior people. Now this is the thing. Communication will be between these parts. Between the ruling part, the leadership, the regime or government as parts or agencies or divisions within the government, and subordinate units and actors within the agencies, etc. Next, within society, between supporters of the regime, opponents of the regime, neutral, undecided, or disaffected or alienated. Next, from outside the society, outside governments, supporting or opposing, outside supporters, outside opponents, outside neutrals. Okay? This is the structure. Now I do this little monster map. This is missing the ruling is here is the ruling part. I'm missing subordinate. I'm not doing the subordinations of subordinate elements here. This is the society. Therefore, all of these are the interactions of the activities here. So this network of associations is the mechanism of communication that for a political system to operate, all this communication is going on here. Therefore, what is it? Managing it. Good government and propaganda is necessary to what? Propaganda is aimed at between here, the society, and the larger world. But also there's information to control the government. Then there's information to society to help the society better operate and interact with the government. So that's why. There's propaganda and then there's public information, right? What is what? Is public information really another name for propaganda? Yes. And isn't propaganda another name? In other words, propaganda is information disliked. And there we're at it. We're at the end, no quiz today, so voila, and we're a little over. So let you guys go, we're over, so take care. Bye-bye.